Job, he believed regardless of the circumstances. Even when he got to the point he cursed his own birth. He wished he'd never been born. But even through all that, he still didn't give up on God. He still wouldn't curse God. His priorities were right there. He believed regardless of the circumstances. So Pastor Mike has been talking about your words, your mind, your actions, what you do, and scientifically how that they find that what you say does affect your life around you. What you do affects you. Your thoughts affect you. I am standing before you today and saying it is true. I believe it with my whole heart. What you think does affect. How you think does affect. Your attitude does affect what happens in your life. Job, everything was horrible for him, but his attitude is one of gratitude, saying, God, I love you anyway. Despite the circumstances, he didn't blame God. He got to the point where his friends weren't so good, and he wasn't really happy with them, but he never, ever took it out against God. His attitude was one of surrender. And so was Peter. Peter, when he walked in that water, his attitude was extreme obedience. It wasn't just, you ever watch these shows where they do all these goofy stunts and it's, just jump in and see what happens? That isn't anything what God's talking about here. Because it's not just courage. It took some courage for Peter to step out, but he had to have courage and wisdom and discernment. Those three things together are what God needs for us to do the things he wants us to do. We have to have courage, we have to have wisdom and discernment. And your speech and your actions do make a difference. Remember Pastor Mike last week, he was talking about our body language and what it says about us, and if we're telling people we love God, but we don't act like it. Jesus loves you, but at the same time I'm doing things against you. What kind of an example is that? We are not living what we're saying. Our words and our actions have to match. If we say we believe that God is going to provide for us, we need to act like God is going to provide to us. You've heard that old adage, if you believe it's going to rain, you bring an umbrella. Same kind of thing. If you believe God is going to be there for you, you start praising him anyway. Pastor Mick says this all the time, but it does work. You start praising him for what he's already done before you can see it with your physical eyes. I do not know how many times when we've been in financial situations, and there's been a lot of them over the years, when I did not know how that bill was going to get paid. And somehow or another, God provided it. Either he changed the bill, he changed the due date, he provided income, he did something that got us out of that situation. It might not have been for long, but then we had to trust him for the next thing. But if you really believe God's going to provide, it's going to change how you act. And what you think does become your reality. If you believe that God's called you to do whatever it is, maybe it's not even necessarily God calling. Maybe you believe that you're going to be an astronaut. I'm just picking something that I don't think anybody here probably has dreams of being an astronaut. But maybe you're 16 years old and you believe God has called you to be an astronaut. You want to be an astronaut with your whole life. And you don't take any math, and you don't take any science, and you never check out NASA. How is God going to fulfill that dream within you if you don't do anything to pursue it? If you want to be a missionary to Cambodia, do you give to missions? Have you studied the language? Have you studied the culture? When missionaries come to town, do you take them out to lunch, find out what it's like to be a missionary? Do you attend missionary events? Are you doing things to bring you to that goal? What you think about becomes your reality, and what you do complements what you think about. And I think part of the problem is in our society that we kind of go on mind numb. We don't really do a lot of thinking. We just kind of live in our life day in and day out. We're not keeping Jesus at the center and really thinking about everything that we're doing in the day. How does that affect our life? We're going to take a little test this morning. Is everybody awake? I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you have to say it loud and proud, okay? Really loud so I can hear you from up here. All right, I want you to give me the first answer that comes to your mind, okay? The tree that grows from an acorn is called an oak, okay? The vapor that rises from fire is called smoke. The sound that a frog makes is called the white of an egg is called how many said yolk? The white of an egg is called the white. We get into those patterns with our thinking all the time because we think this is the way it's going to be, so we don't stop and say, wait a minute. Have you ever noticed that you do this and you get this? Every time you do this, this happens. It's because we kind of go on that mindless thing of we're just doing the same thing day in and day out and day in and day out and day in and day out, and we forget to stop. Wait a minute. Let's change our mind. Let's change our thoughts. I liked what Einstein says. There are only two ways of living, two ways to live your life. One is though nothing is a miracle, and the other is though everything is a miracle. That's how I want to live. I believe it. I've probably got myself into trouble by thinking that way all the time, but you know what? Doggone. I believe if God asks me to do something, He's going to give me the power to do it. Let me ask you guys a question this morning. When is the last time you've ever done anything that you couldn't do without the help of God? When is the last time you have been in a water walking experience where you know if God pulled back His grace, you would sink? When is the last time anything that you've done made your heart kind of pitter-patter a little bit? Like, oh man, I am not comfortable in this situation. We need to feel that more often. We need to be in those situations. We need to allow God to put us in those situations where I'm just not really that comfortable here, and God, you better show up. Otherwise, I don't know what's going to happen. I so believe there's nothing that can limit us. If we keep our mind on Christ and not on the world, if we listen to what He says instead of our physical bodies, if we listen to what He says instead of what the world says, I do believe that I have the mind of Christ. I do believe when I was back in school and I couldn't get something, and if I had done what I was supposed to do, you study, you read, you do the things you're supposed to do, but I totally believe I have the mind of Christ, so that when that moment comes and I don't know what to do, I know He does. And He's the one who gives wisdom. And He's the one who can give those answers.